Welcome to HOA Disasters, the channel where we expose the outrageous, the absurd, and the downright unbelievable stories from neighborhood hell. I'm Dan, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA that went too far, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell because trust me, these stories only get crazier. Now let's get started. The sun was just starting to wake, its pale light dripping over the edge of the world, when Mark first opened his front door and stepped outside. Humidity clung to him like a second shirt even before 8 a.m., thick and sour, with the promise of another sweltering summer day in the neighborhood where every home looked almost the same. But his yard did not look like the others. Instead of emerald sod clipped to military perfection, Mark's grass grew wild in uneven tufts. There were flashes of orange among the weeds, a sprawl of milkweed crowding over one corner, and in the center a spray of purple coneflowers, tousled and stubborn, pushing their way up between the cracks. Not everyone saw beauty. Some called it messy. Some whispered or didn't whisper at all. He sipped his coffee and listened to the bee hovering near his ankle, heavy with yellow pollen. It did not know about lines or rules or neighborhood codes. It just worked. Mark scanned the painted faces of his neighbors' homes across the street, rows of bright doors, identical black shutters, driveways clean as a dentist's chair. He wondered if someone was already watching him, jumping at shadows, or maybe just waiting for him to mow. He remembered what Gail from 2 doors down had said, not even 2 weeks ago, while deadheading hydrangeas that bloomed the same unnatural white as her kitchen. Mark, you've got to do something about that jungle. The HOA will go ballistic. He'd laughed, warm and tired, and told her he liked the bees. But he'd noticed it then, the sideways look, the quick frown, the distrust curling in her voice as if letting the milkweed bloom was an act of aggression. He was sure it was her who'd started the complaints. Mail in those days was a kind of dread. When the letter arrived, thick cream envelope, embossed with that familiar golden triangle, he already knew what it would say. It was always the same. Dear homeowner, your lawn is in violation of the Homeowners Association Lawn Standards, Section 14B. The words thudded against his chest. He wanted to tear it up, but instead he pinned it to his refrigerator, right beside a photograph from the backyard last spring. His daughter, Sophie, clutching a mason jar, eyes glued to a monarch struggling from its pale green chrysalis on the tallest milkweed. Mark remembered thinking then that it would all be worth it. For her, for the bees, for anything that could crawl or fly or clutch sunlight in trembling wings. But that day, as he picked up his tools and saw the envelope, his resolve wavered. Trouble could mean fines, even legal fees. What if the board forced him to rip it all out? What if Sophie came home and saw all that color flattened, dust instead of wildness? The next time he checked his mailbox, there were 3 copies of the letter, each stamped with bright, almost cheerful warnings. He dialed the number on the bottom of the most recent letter. It rang for nearly 5 minutes before anyone answered. When they did, the line scratched in his ear and a slow, tired voice greeted him. Homeowners Association, this is Denise. Mark cleared his throat. Hi, this is Mark Conrad, 22 Fawn Lane. I got the notices about my yard. Can you tell me which rule I'm breaking? I've been careful about the setbacks. There's no debris, no trash. A pause. It's about the grass, Mr. Conrad. It has to be 2.5 inches tall maximum. You're well outside compliance. And the wildflowers, Section 12. It must be traditional turf grass. Traditional? Mark asked, heat rising in his face. You mean nothing that grows unless it came in a plastic tray from Home Depot? There was rustling in the background. Sir, it's the rule. Didn't you read your packets? He wanted to shout to demand changes, but instead words froze in his throat. He saw, in his mind, the faces of the board lined up behind that phone. Patient, blank, rules and order pressed into their expressions. I did, he said. But there are pollinators everywhere these days, the articles. Didn't you see the mayor's speech about native plants and monarchs? And the signs going up. A brittle silence. That is not a discussion for the board. Your deadline is in the notice. If you don't comply, you'll accrue daily fines. The phone clicked. That night, Mark lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan as it ticked softly. The room felt tight around him. He heard the faint hum of insects outside the window, a low music from his wild garden, and wondered if this was how a battle started. In silence, with the slow grind of stubbornness against the machinery of rules. He thought about Sophie, about her soft wonder, about the afternoon she'd nearly cried when he explained why the neighbors were angry. He felt for that hurt, burning in him like a match. Would there even be butterflies next season if the HOA won? Would anyone even notice what quietly vanished, or would they just cheer the return of monotone green? As sunrise crept toward his window, a new idea took root in him. Something gnawed at the edge of his mind. It started as a what-if, small and shaky. What if there was a way to fight that wouldn't destroy him? He got up, heart pounding, grabbed his laptop, and began searching. That's when he found it, a government program buried in a web of links in tiny black print. Habitat certifications, supporting pollinators, federal protection. Could it work? Would Sophie understand? Would anyone? He made a note on a scrap of paper, pollinator habitat application urgent. Somewhere outside, a bee bounced lightly against his window, and Mark wondered if it was a sign. As he shut the laptop, he couldn't shake one last question. If he pushed back, how far would they go to stop him? He didn't know yet, but already somewhere in those shadows, a line had been drawn. The next morning arrived sharp and breathless. Mark stood in his backyard, hands on his hips, and let the dew soak through his socks. Every detail of the space mattered now, every unruly patch, every milkweed stalk overlooked, every bee nesting in the hollow spaces between rocks. He crouched down and brushed his hand over a patch of violets, urging a tiny caterpillar to safety before standing up to peer across the fence. His neighbor, Mrs. Klein, was already out, armed with a bottle of weed killer, spraying along her driveway. She kept glancing over at his yard. Her gaze was not friendly. Mark forced a smile and waved, but Mrs. Klein just frowned. He lingered for a minute, pretending to inspect his plants. He wondered if she had also called the HOA. He pictured the boardroom table, clean, empty, the air conditioner blasting, a stack of photographs splayed in the center, his wildflowers in glossy color like mug shots. His phone buzzed. Another text from Sophie's mother. "Did you get more letters? I'm worried." Mark didn't reply right away. He needed her to believe he had it handled. He wanted to believe it, too. Turning his phone in his hands, he scrolled through the screenshots he'd taken last night. References, legal codes, case studies in dense government jargon. Slowly, clarity began to form. He'd filled out the basic habitat application while the coffee brewed. It was longer than he expected. Detailed plant lists, layout diagrams, evidence of pollinator activity, photographs, logs, scientific names. Mark regretted not labeling his photos better. He would have to organize them all. It wasn't just paperwork. There were instructions he'd missed. Leave logs for beetles, shallow dishes for butterflies. Document pollen transfer. With each line, his heartbeat grew steadier. Where before he'd felt panic, now a plan began to root itself in him. He took out his camera and started documenting everything. Dozens of bees on a single coneflower, a swallowtail pausing on a blade of grass. He knelt in the mud and filmed ants busy along a rotting stick. Hours slipped by in a manic hush. A car slowly cruised past his house twice. Black SUV, tinted windows, one he'd seen parked by the HOA office on community cleanup days. He felt a cold prickle but kept recording, pretending not to notice. Inside, Sophie's voice called down the stairs. "Dad, what's for lunch?" He tucked the camera under his arm and wiped his hands on his shirt. "Grilled cheese, if you help me pick tomatoes. Hurry before it rains." She grinned and bolted outside. Mark felt a sharp squeeze of guilt. This was her world, tangled wild, all soft petals and crawling legs. What if he lost it for her? Together, they pulled fat red tomatoes from the vine. Sophie, her hands sticky with juice, shared a secret. She'd named every bee she could find. There's Waffles and Puffin and Cheddar because he's orange. Mark laughed, soaking in her joy. Do you think the bees like our garden? She nodded, hair wild in the sun. They come here when it's too hot everywhere else. Lunch came and went. Mark kept sneaking away to edit his application photos, uploading them to the Habitat site, agonizing over each caption. Here's a monarch, here's evidence of caterpillar host plants, here's a native bee. By late afternoon, he had dozens of files ready. He attached the required diagrams and submitted the application. Now, he would have to wait. Weeks, maybe more. He wondered if the HOA would be patient. That evening, as dusk slipped over the rooftops, another letter arrived. This one was taped to his front door. The edges curled as if it had been hurriedly pressed in place. Mark peeled it off and read, heart thudding. Final warning. Noncompliance will result in daily fines. Lawn must be mowed and nonconforming vegetation removed within 48 hours. He pressed the paper against his chest and closed his eyes. Sophie tiptoed up behind him, reading over his shoulder. Are we in trouble, Dad? He hesitated. How could he explain to her the way fear shivered beneath his skin, the way anger twisted tight? Not if I can help it, he whispered, but the words felt empty. Inside, as the first drops of rain tapped the windows, Mark sat at his desk and drafted an email. To board members, per Section 7 of the HOA bylaws and under federal guidelines regarding pollinator habitat certification, I am in the process of applying for protected status. He attached photos, links, studies, anything to buy more time. He hit send, stomach in free fall. He kept picturing the HOA's faces, and he wondered, if they forced a showdown, would anyone stand up for him? Or would they all just keep spraying and mowing while everything else disappeared? He left a light on in the living room that night, not sure why. As he settled into bed, thunder rumbled over their home. Sophie's door creaked open. She crawled into his bed, clutching a plush bee in her arms. Are the bees afraid of storms, Dad? She asked, voice small. He kissed her tangled hair and whispered, maybe, but they always find a way through. Mark stared at the ceiling, wide awake, as rain battered the house around them. He knew storms always passed, but sometimes they left ruin behind. The digital clock blinked from his nightstand, 1:52, 1:53, and Mark kept thinking, had he done enough? What if there was more he could lose than grass? Outside, the rain slipped through the milkweed, soft as regret. And deep inside, something else was waking, the sense that this battle was about to crack wide open. Mark's days became a circle, waking to worry, tending the garden, guarding the mailbox. Each sunrise stretched out like a dare. He felt the tension simmering, like the air before a thunderstorm. Neighbors grew more distant. A boy on a skateboard rolled by, staring at the wild sprawl and whispering to his friend. Mail carriers arrived but avoided eye contact. Even Mrs. Klein seemed to spray more fiercely, as if she could draw a border with herbicide. Mark had always been invisible in the neighborhood. Now he was infamous. He checked his email 5 times every morning, hungry for any update. Nothing. The habitat application sat under review. But the HOA was quick. By Thursday, a slip of paper arrived, $250 fine accruing daily. The sum clawed at his budget. He felt heat flood his cheeks. How could they move so fast? He dialed the HOA a second time, voice tense. Denise picked up again, slow and unmoved. This is my 3rd warning, he said. But I'm under official review for a federal habitat certification. She took his information, clicking keys. That doesn't override our guidelines, sir. You need legal documentation. Until then, the fines stand. He tried to keep calm. I'm not mowing a protected area. By the time you process the appeal, you'll have ruined everything. Silence, Denise exhaled. Sir, we don't want to escalate. But it was already too late. Escalation felt inevitable. He spent the next day documenting everything, every bee, every butterfly, every child who tiptoed by with wide eyes. He took video at dawn and sunset, gathering proof. It felt both desperate and defiant. The neighbors didn't speak, but their glances grew longer. Somewhere, Mark heard the pop of a soda can opening. Laughter. He wondered what stories were being shared. Was he a hero or just a fool? Sophie watched him from the kitchen, quiet. "Is someone going to take our yard away?" she asked, not for the first time. He shook his head, trying for a smile, but inside his stomach twisted. That night, as he read through more legal texts, he realized the HOA bylaws predated most federal conservation rules. There was a loophole, small but powerful. If a property was certified and posted with official habitat signage, it gained certain protections. Removal would require much more than a routine notice. Mark circled the passage and scribbled a note. Signage equals safety. He kept reading, mind racing. If he could get the signage up before enforcement, the HOA would need a court order to override it. Delay might become victory. He stared at his wild garden, now packed tight with butterflies, and saw not disaster, but hope. He posted an update on a local gardening forum asking about timelines. Replies poured in. Hang in there, get a temporary sign. Document everything. People told stories of their own battles, threatened meadows, community gardens under attack, silent victories. One even offered to send a temporary sign. Invigorated, Mark crafted his own sign with cardboard and permanent marker. Under review for pollinator habitat certification, protected under federal law. He posted it at the edge of his yard, close to the mailbox. Passers-by paused, someone photographed it. By sunset, another letter arrived demanding immediate action. But this time, Mark did not feel alone. He drafted a reply attaching everything, signed photos, certification application receipts, recordings of bees. He finished with a simple line. I will not destroy federally protected habitat for convenience. His hand trembled as he sent it. Hours later, his phone buzzed. A new email flickered on his screen. Forwarded to the board's legal team. Mark stared at the notice, breath caught in his throat. What would legal escalation even look like? Would lawyers darken his door? Would the neighborhood turn outright hostile? He glanced up. Sophie was watching him, eyes wide, waiting for the answer he couldn't give. Lightning forked on the horizon, lighting up his wildflowers in strange electric colors. It suddenly struck him. No matter what happened next, something had shifted. For better or worse, there was no way back now. 3 days later, the neighborhood pulsed with unease. Mark noticed trash cans moved a little further away from his curb. Over the fence, Mrs. Klein muttered under her breath each time he passed. He kept tending his garden, watering, weeding, documenting, but every movement felt like defiance. He checked the federal habitat application portal obsessively. Nothing. In process. The words felt heavy with accusation. The HOA, on the other hand, was unyielding. A thick envelope arrived by courier, notice of fines exceeding $1,000, demands for immediate landscaping, threats of legal proceedings. They'd attached photographs of the offending vegetation, grainy images marked up in red, like evidence from a crime scene. Mark felt his hands tremble. How could it cost this much just to grow flowers? The threat of court, of fees he couldn't pay, gnawed at him. Sophie watched him that evening as he sat with the paperwork, face drawn. Why do they hate us? She asked quietly. He didn't know how to explain the smallness that bred control, the need to press everyone into the same green stripe. He pulled her onto his lap and pointed out the window. Do you see all those butterflies? He whispered. They don't hate us, they just want to live. She leaned her head against his chest. Online, the story began to spread beyond Mark's small world. A neighbor, anonymous but clearly sympathetic, posted a shot of Mark's wild garden on the local community page. Can't we have some color? Kids love these flowers, leave him alone. Others chimed in, some for most against. HOA board members replied with tight corporate phrases. Standards matter. This is not a wildlife reserve. Take responsibility. Mark felt his cheeks flush as he scrolled. With every comment, the battle lines sharpened. The following morning, a pale Lexus rolled up and parked in front of his house. 3 people stepped out. 2 in crisp polo shirts with HOA lanyards, 1 in a suit. They marched to his door and knocked hard enough to rattle the glass. Mark opened the door, heart hammering. "Mr. Conrad, we are here to inform you that your property is now under formal citation. Legal counsel will be in touch regarding recovery of costs if you continue this unlawful activity." One of the board members, Mr. Parker, stiff and unsmiling, snapped photographs of the yard over their shoulder. The suit, was he a lawyer, offered a thin smile. "We encourage you to comply. Litigation is rarely pleasant for anyone." Mark almost laughed. Instead, he met the man's eyes and answered, "I'd like to see you try to mow down a monarch. I'm not backing down." He closed the door before they could answer. They looked stunned. He pressed his forehead against the door, breath shaky. Had he just made things worse? He went outside and checked his sign. It was still there, battered but bold. He noticed something startling. Someone had left a small note tucked into the mailbox. He unfolded it. "Love your flowers, we're rooting for you." No signature, but Mark's heart swelled. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. He held the note in his hand a long time, feeling possibility flicker at the edges. He couldn't help wondering, if this was the escalation, what came next? In the fading light, he sensed the fight was about to tip into something even harder to contain. Mark woke at dawn, a pit lodged in his stomach. From his bedroom window, he watched as 2 unfamiliar trucks idled down the block, city logos, orange vests glinting in the haze. A cold sweat trickled down his neck. Were they here for him? Was this the day the garden would be torn apart? He dressed and hurried outside, heart thumping. He nearly collided with Parker, the board member from yesterday, who was conferring with a city worker by the sidewalk. Both turned quickly as Mark approached, the city employee looking uncomfortable. Parker's voice was flat. "We're investigating several code violations on your property per complaint. The city has been notified." Mark bristled. "My garden is under federal application review. If you destroy anything, it's on record." The city worker glanced down at his clipboard. "Are you the one with the pollinator sign?" Mark nodded, nerves buzzing. "We're looking into it," the city worker said, softer now. "But if you have documentation, please provide it. We don't make decisions on HOA complaints alone." Parker scoffed, clearly annoyed. Mark ducked inside and grabbed his stack of paperwork, the photos, the email chains. Sophie followed, anxiety etched across her small face. "Do we have to move?" she asked, barely audible. He shook his head, voice tight. "No. Not for flowers." Back outside, Mark handed his binder to the city worker. He explained the habitat process, the protective status, the science behind native plants. His words tumbled out, awkward but determined. After a moment, the worker nodded. "We'll review your materials, contact you if we need clarification." Mark glanced at Parker, whose jaw was bunched tight enough to crack. Unable to resist, Mark said, "If my wildflowers help even one butterfly, was it worth all this trouble to you?" No answer. The trucks rumbled away, not stopping at Mark's lot. This small reprieve energized him. But the fear didn't really dissolve. He began to notice things he'd missed before, a neighbor's curtain twitching, a new, angry thread online, a car slowing, then driving off quickly as someone photographed his yard. He posted another update to the gardening forum, explaining the HOA's escalation, the city's involvement, his own uncertainty. Messages flooded back. Most were supportive, but a few were venomous. "If you want to live in a dump, move to the woods. People like you ruin nice places." Mark tried not to let them sting. Tried. Dinner that evening was silent, Sophie drawing bees in crayon at the table while Mark watched the driveway, nerves still raw. Right before bedtime, his phone pinged. Application progressed to advanced review. Official signage pending. His breath caught. Could this be it? But alongside the update, another email came through, a terse note from the HOA board. unless official documentation is received within 3 business days. Further action will proceed up to and including lien on property for unpaid fines. Mark gripped the edges of the table. 3 days. 3 days to protect everything that mattered. As he stared into the shadows past his window, a shiver ran through him. The finish line was so close, almost mockingly so, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA wasn't done fighting. Each hour now measured itself by retreat and advance. Mark called the Habitat office first thing, begging for an expedited sign. The woman on the line sounded harried but friendly. "I see your application looks solid," she assured him. "We're backed up because of demand. I'll mark it as urgent. But official signage still takes time. Did you post a temporary sign?" He nodded, almost laughing at what his world had shrunk to. One battered cardboard sign, standing between his family and disaster. He pleaded, "Is there anything else I can do?" A pause. "If you know anyone with provisional signage, borrow it. The law is on your side, but you'll want everything documented." He sent desperate messages to the online forum, searching for a real sign he could borrow. By noon, someone responded, a Habitat advocate 3 towns away. She had an extra. If he could pick it up tonight, it was his. Mark texted his boss, inventing an excuse for leaving early. He kissed Sophie goodbye, promising burgers for dinner, and drove into the thick tangle of rush hour. The advocate's house was impossible to miss. Native flowers bursting over every inch, wind chimes singing. A blue and white federal sign anchored in the soil. Certified pollinator habitat, federal protection in force. In the shade, the woman smiled as Mark explained his story. "You're not alone," she said softly, handing over the spare sign. He felt something loosen in his chest. By dusk, Mark was home, planting the new sign deep in his yard. It gleamed in the headlights as he hammered it into the ground. As he stepped back to admire it, he noticed a gathering at the end of the cul-de-sac. 5 board members, talking in tight circles, casting glances his way. The message was clear, they'd seen the sign. But for the first time, Mark felt stronger than brittle paper warnings. Inside, Sophie watched him through the window, hope flickering in her eyes. Will they stop now? He couldn't promise, but he knew this sign was not just for the garden. It was a declaration, a dare. The next morning, he watched from his porch as Parker drove by slowly, eyeing the official seal on the sign. There was no police, no bulldozers, no city trucks, but Mark's phone chirped mid-morning. HOA board has requested emergency session. As the house grew quiet, thunder built on the horizon. Mark felt the air sharpen, charged with electricity. He kept glancing at the sign, half scared it would vanish. What would the board do now that federal law had entered the yard? He could only wonder. Somewhere in that thick, buzzing silence, rain began to fall. When the downpour ended and the sun crept back over the white-tipped houses, Mark found the neighborhood transformed. The streets glittered, bearing the scent of clean grass and wet asphalt. His own yard, now proudly bearing the federal marker, felt untouchable, if only on the surface. The next day unfolded with haunting slowness. Garbage cans rolled out as usual. Mrs. Klein scowled extra hard but avoided eye contact. A few neighbors lingered at the curb, speaking in low voices. The official sign created a kind of invisible barrier. But Mark sensed tension, not peace. Sophie drew a crayon rainbow and taped it over the kitchen window. "So the bees know where to come," she explained. Mark managed a laugh, but dread gnawed at him. Would the board go quietly? Or simply find a new way? He received a formal email that afternoon. HOA board has initiated review of federal legal standing. We will consult counsel and update action plan after emergency session. He read the message 3 times. Would federal protection really matter if the HOA found a loophole? Could they simply rewrite the rules or escalate fines until the garden still vanished? That evening, as he watered the milkweed, he heard footsteps behind him, a soft, hesitant shuffle. He turned to find Gail, the neighbor who'd first complained, standing at the edge of his yard. She looked tired, her shoulders hunched, holding a glass casserole dish. Mark stiffened, unsure what to expect. Gail glanced at the sign. Her voice wavered. "I brought dinner. No one's sleeping much around here. I wanted to talk." He gestured toward the porch, wary but curious. As they sat, she studied her hands. "It's not just about the yard, you know," she eventually said, voice trembling. "Everyone's afraid. The board threatens us too. Fines if our mulch is the wrong color. I guess I took it out on you." Mark swallowed hard, anger and pity twisting inside him. He heard a new honesty in her voice, fear deeper than anger. Gail handed him the casserole. "I voted to stop the latest fine. It didn't work. They're relentless." She raised her eyes. "I think you're doing something brave. Maybe we all needed someone to stand up, instead of just getting smaller." A knot loosened in Mark's chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Sophie peeked through the door, beaming. Dinner felt different with someone else at the table, even if conflict buzzed beneath the surface. Later, as Gail walked home, Mark realized her visit meant something. Maybe the board was losing its lock on everyone. Maybe others were ready to question. But as he watched the emergency meeting unfold online the next evening, board members in angry, pixelated boxes, Mark saw something cold in their eyes. If they couldn't win with fines, what would they try next? He stared at his now-certified garden, the sign gleaming, and wondered what price would be demanded for victory, and whether he was ready to pay it. A thick, humid fog hung over Mark Street the next week, blanketing lawns in muffled gray. Neighbors spoke even less than before, but something in the air had shifted. Glances that used to be hostile softened to wary curiosity, or even something like encouragement. Mark received his first official letter from the federal office. "Your pollinator habitat application is approved. Your property is now registered. Please allow up to 2 weeks for the metal signage to arrive. Temporary signage is valid under code." His hands shook reading the email. It was victory, but with an edge of worry. He rushed outside, snapping photos of the sign, the yard, the bees darting through raindrops. He documented everything, sending a copy to the city code office, the board, and his attorney friend who'd begun advising him for free. Now his garden was not just a personal act of hope, it was federally logged and public. There would be no backing down, but the board, predictably, did not admit defeat. Instead, a new round of letters arrived, tense, lawyerly, accusing Mark of creating a public safety issue, and alleging that his wildflowers attracted dangerous pests, created a fire hazard, and reduced property values. Mark felt rage simmer in his veins. He called City Hall, who responded with thinly veiled annoyance. "Sir, your paperwork is in order. Absent an actual code violation, we are not sending inspectors." He posted the board's letter online, alongside his government approval. The story spread online forums, local news, even a radio show invitation. Messages of support poured in, but also threats. One email, unsigned, read, "You think you're better than this place. Watch your back." That night, Mark triple-checked his windows and doors, unease replacing any sense of victory. Sophie asked, "Why are people so mad, Dad?" He drew her close, voice rough. "Change is scary. People lash out before they think." But as they watered the garden together, a new kind of strength wove through him. Later, Mark received a call from the city's environmental office. A woman's voice was warm, congratulatory. "We heard about your fight," she said. "There are a lot of people rooting for you. Would you consider speaking at the community sustainability meeting?" He hesitated, public speaking terrified him, but something in her voice made him agree. Could sharing his story change more than just his fate? But even as he smiled, a different email pinged, a new threat from the HOA board. Emergency vote, proposed amendment to ban all non-grass lawns, regardless of federal status, pending legal review. Mark blinked hard, heart twisting. They would do anything, it seemed, to keep control. He paced his living room for hours, the uncertainty wrapping tight, and waited for what new storm the board would unleash. Days trickled past, everyone thick with apprehension. Mark's story grew local legs. A small TV crew stopped by, filming Mark while he and Sophie planted new seeds in the front yard. He tried to sound brave in the interviews. These native flowers aren't weeds. They're lifelines. The anchor nodded sympathetically, but Mark saw a flicker of amusement in his eyes, as if Mark was simply this week's oddity. On the neighborhood's social media, the debate raged. Someone posted, "If we let Conrad keep his mess, what next, chickens?" Yet others shared photos of children counting butterflies on his sidewalk, Sophie's rainbow art, the garden's battered sign. Mark noticed a subtle change. Where before he felt hunted, now he felt watched curiously, even gently. Someone dropped off a bag of wildflower seeds. Another neighbor, rarely seen, gave him a quiet thumbs up as she pulled weeds beside her own mailbox. But the HOA was not deterred. A formal meeting was scheduled. Neighbors were called to vote on the emergency amendment, ban pollinator gardens, exempt none. Mark prepared obsessively. He shared government resources, invited neighbors to walk his garden, handed out flyers about bees and birds, even taped photos of endangered monarchs to lamp posts. He called the environmental officer for help, asked for any statement, any legal support. Still, the fear never left. The night of the vote, Mark and Sophie walked to the clubhouse, hearts pounding. The meeting room bustled with tension, board members behind a neat table, neighbors filling plastic chairs. Some smiled, some glanced away. Mr. Parker read the amendment in crisp, cold tones. "We must keep our neighborhood uniform, safe, beautiful." A single word, uniform, echoed in Mark's head. He raised his hand at the microphone, hands shaking. "My garden is legal. It's home to hundreds of creatures. And we're teaching our kids not to fear wildness, but to protect it." A hush fell. Sophie clung to his hand, whispering, "You can do it, Dad." Other homeowners spoke. Some muttered about property values. Others, once silent, shared that they too worried about pollinators, about drought, about the lifeless green lawns choking their budgets. Gail, the neighbor who once opposed him, stood to speak. "I was wrong. The flowers make me smile. And maybe we should change, instead of punishing what's different." The board grew visibly agitated. After an eternity, the vote was called by secret ballot. As the final counts were tallied, sweat ran down Mark's spine. "It's close," Parker announced, jaw rigid. "Amendment fails by 2 votes." A roar of relief rippled through the crowd. Sophie squealed, "Yes." But Parker snarled, "This isn't over. We will appeal." Mark hugged his daughter tight, but at the edge of his vision, he saw the board members huddling, whispering, planning. For now, he had won, but the battle was far from finished. Outside, under the glow of the street lamp, the night felt alive in new ways. But Mark knew peace would not come easily. Victory at the meeting echoed for days, but Mark found himself haunted by Parker's threat. What would the board's next move be? Litigation? New rules? They had money and connections. Mark finally reached out to an old friend, a lawyer. He described everything: the federal certification, the signs, the fines, the threats. His friend listened, then whistled. "You did your homework. If they try to override federal law, you'll need documentation of every conversation. Keep records, and watch for retaliation. They sometimes escalate in petty ways." At first, things seemed quiet. No new fines arrived, not at Mark's address anyway. But a neighbor knocked one afternoon, eyes weary. "They cited me, said I need to lower my hedge by 4 inches. Never cared before." Others got letters about mailbox numbers, paint shades, garden gnomes. Mark felt guilt pressing on his heart. Had the board turned their frustrations on softer targets? He wrote posts about solidarity, reminding neighbors they were stronger together. He attended board meetings, staying visible, asking questions about every agenda item. Sophie's friends, once forbidden to play at her house, began stopping by again. Their parents waved, eyes glittering with curiosity, sometimes relief. On the online forum, someone posted, "If the HOA can't stop Conrad, maybe we should all plant milkweed. But some responses were angry still. Anarchy starts small. If you want to live in the jungle, move out of our neighborhood. Then one night close to midnight, Mark's phone glowed, a security camera alert. He pulled up the feed, heart in his throat. A figure, tall, hunched, wearing a cap, had tiptoed into his yard, pulling up one of the wildflowers near the sign before darting away. He raced outside, flashlight sweeping the grass, finding only a few petals strewn on the dirt. He filed a report, posted the footage, and received dozens of outrage messages from supporters. Then a neighbor messaged privately, "That was Parker's son. He's bragging about it at school." Mark felt the old surge of rage and helplessness. If the board could not win on paper, would they simply stoop to harassment? He tightened security, installed new lights, walked the garden each dawn, heart bruised. Sophie asked, "Will they break all the flowers?" He tucked her in, vowing softly, "They might try, but they can't stop what's already growing." He kept repeating that promise, to himself more than to her. But in the darkness, doubt tingled in the roots of his resolve. What would they break next, if not just the flowers? The neighborhood settled into uneasy patterns. Mark's story made local headlines and a few national podcasts. More neighbors stopped by, some dropping off wildflower seeds or offering tired smiles. Others brushed past him at the mailbox like he was invisible. The garden thrived in late summer heat, milkweed taller than ever, monarchs swarming, native bees busy among the scattered petals. Mark received the official medal sign in the mail, a heavy slab, its federal insignia bright as a medal. He mounted it near the curb, watching Mrs. Klein stare through her window. He almost felt triumphant. But more letters circulated, property value studies, warnings about future HOA insurance hikes, even accusations that pollinator gardens breed allergies. Mark's lawyer friend helped him craft careful, public responses. The neighborhood's nerves frayed. Some blamed him for attracting news vans, while others whispered that the board was pushing too hard. The city environmental office sent a group of schoolchildren to tour the garden. Mark guided them, voice trembling with pride as he showed off the butterflies and explained why native plants mattered. Sophie announced, "We saved the bees," in front of the class. Mark nearly choked up. After the tour, he found another unsigned note. "Thank you for being brave. Maybe next year I'll try daisies." But harassment hadn't stopped. Sophie's drawings were torn off the mailbox, tomato plants uprooted in the night. Mark's anger burned, but he did not respond with threats. Instead, he organized a pollinator day with the local garden club, kids painting rocks, neighbors sharing seeds, a park ranger talking about new wildlife corridors. People came awkwardly at first, then in larger numbers. Kids laughed as they chased butterflies, retirees swapped plant cuttings. For a few hours, the street felt open and bright, transformed by possibility. Mark glanced at the silent homes across the street, wondering whether he'd changed anything lasting or just exposed himself as a target again. That night, after everyone had gone, he stood at the garden's edge, surrounded by fluttering wings and cricket song. If the board tried again, he was ready. But the deeper question lingered. What had all this cost his family? Had it been worth placing a target on their backs just to make flowers bloom where no one wanted to see them? He knelt to pull out a weed tangled among the milkweed, the night cool and endless. Something rustled in the shadows behind him, a sound half hope, half warning. He straightened, heart pounding. Were things finally changing in the neighborhood? Or was the next attack already closer than he realized? Summer waned, painting the wildflowers in golds and russets. Mark's garden, now a haven of life, trembled in the sunset even as the air sharpened with the first hints of autumn. Officially, he had won. No more fines, no more letters threatened him directly. But the board's pettiness persisted in 1,000 small ways. Meeting schedules shifted to inconvenience supporters. New restrictions slipped quietly into bylaws. Social pressure quietly redirected. Some nights Sophie still asked if they would have to leave. Mark soothed her worries, but inside he wrestled with his own doubts. He heard his neighbors talk at the playground in grocery lines. Some grumbled about weeds, others about property values, but those voices no longer dominated. He noticed new gardens, small, shy patches of color at scattered lots. A single coneflower pressed up beside a mailbox. A milkweed bursting through mulch. Change had slipped through the cracks, ignored or quietly tolerated. The federal sign stood bright, battered, but unmoved by wind or rumor. One chilly morning, Mark received a packet in the mail, a copy of the new HOA guidelines, marked up in the board's confident pen. He read line after line of new restrictions, arrows and addendums dancing around the crucial issue. Non-traditional vegetation prohibited, except where federal law supersedes. An undercurrent of resentment ran through every word, but also a hint of surrender, the acknowledgement that he'd carved out a new exception, if only for himself. He drove Sophie to school, noticing other kids pointing excitedly at the milkweed, shouting, "I saw a monarch." Sophie smiled like sunlight. That afternoon he met with neighbors, some new, some old critics, who wanted advice on pollinator gardens. He offered seeds, sketches, words of hard-won caution. The battle lines had blurred, but old wounds remained. Some avoided his eyes at the mailbox or let their dogs trample his flowers. Sometimes he wondered if this would ever truly heal. Yet each day he watched the garden endure, color in the midst of conformity, stubborn wildness pressing up where order once tried to root out every difference. Mark sat beneath his battered sign at dusk, Sophie's head on his shoulder, and listened to the night hum. He wondered, not for the first time, what his neighbors dreamed as they watched his flowers swallow the setting sun. Had anything really changed? Or was it just him, the man who would not be mowed down? A single monarch circled overhead as the dark fell, and Mark knew one battle had ended, but the true war for wildness would never really sleep. Late autumn found Mark's garden waning, but still alive. Brown-stalked but sheltering hidden life, his plot looked more ragged each day, but glory lingered in the last red asters, the goldfinches flitting among the seeds. The board, exhausted by the legal back and forth and local ridicule, began to change tactics. Where once they sent threats, now came silence. Mark spent his mornings in the dew, repairing fences, collecting seeds, teaching Sophie how to lie low in the wildflowers and spot overwintering cocoons. He noticed something extraordinary. The lines at the annual community cleanup smaller, more polite. An odd hush, as if everyone waited to see if someone else would change first. One afternoon, an official letter arrived, not from the board but from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Dear Mr. Conrad, in recognition of your advocacy, we are sending a free pollinator habitat kit for neighbors interested in creating their own certified gardens. Thank you for your courage. Mark laughed aloud, unable to contain the small bloom of hope. At the board's next meeting, a handful of new voices spoke, defending color, life, and change. One even cited federal codes. The tides had shifted, slow, stubborn, but real. The neighborhood would never be the same, but neither would Mark. The victories were small: a patch of goldenrod at the school entrance, a child's drawing of a bee in the library window, new parents asking for seeds instead of turf. Sophie grew bolder, inviting friends to help harvest and plant, filling jars with caterpillars, writing reports on why wildflowers mattered. Occasional vandalism still happened. Ugly letters still arrived. But the fear had dulled, replaced by purpose. And the HOA, battered by legal losses and public scorn, found it easier to turn their anger elsewhere, occasionally even reaching out for advice on conservation-friendly beautification. Mark couldn't help smiling at the irony. On a crisp November morning, Sophie knelt beside him in the fading garden, voice hushed and reverent. "You didn't let them win, Dad." He pulled her into a hug, heart full to brimming. "No," he said softly, "and neither did you." Mark's yard would never be perfect in the brittle suburban sense, but it was magnificent in the only way that mattered, a living space, untamed and full of fragile hope. He looked at his battered sign, the monarchs drifting low in the last chill, and wondered, if a single wild garden could change so much, what might the next season bring? And what would the board try if numbers grew? He didn't have the answer. But as he stared across the humble wildness, Mark knew one thing for certain. Some battles echo forever, so long as someone is willing to let courage bloom. And the story, the real story, in 100 secret gardens across the country, was just beginning. If this story moved you, share it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories where justice, courage, and community collide. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment where the little guy stands tall. We'll see you in the next one.